Well, we have a number of different characters here today. Some of you know who you are going to be portraying characters from Penfield's past and present. And before we start with the characters, I wanted to give you a short introduction on the history of the town. Shortly after the American Revolution, Oliver Phelps and Nathaniel Gorham made a purchase of 2,600,000 acres in western New York. Phelps explored the land, and it was laid out into townships, and most of the townships were 6 miles square. Township 13, Range 4, would eventually become the town of Penfield. Township 14, Range 4, would eventually become the town of Webster. These two townships, plus the gore of Township 14, Range 7, comprised the town of Penfield in 1810. In 1796, the current towns of Brighton, Henrietta, Irondequoit, Penfield, Parrington, Pittsford, and Webster were organized into one gigantic town that they named Northfield. The name of that town was changed to Boyle in 1808. Someone said they discovered there was another Northfield somewhere else in New York State. Then in 1810, the rapidly growing town of Penfield was the first one to break off. The town of Webster remained part of Penfield until 1840. And that, your handout that you got shows the progression of the towns breaking off, and we highlighted what was happening with Penfield. So today we're going to meet some of the individuals that lived in Penfield from its earliest days up until now. Men and women from the past and present, each have a story to tell. Each has a role in its creation of the town of Penfield. The first individual that we're going to meet is Daniel Penfield. He is obviously the namesake of our town, and we'll give him just a minute to prepare.
Good afternoon. I am Daniel Penfield. I'm an American merchant and Revolutionary War veteran who is best known for founding this great town of Penfield. I was born on April 25th, 1759, to Isaac and Esther Holbrook Penfield in Guilford, Connecticut. About 1784, I married Mary Fellows, daughter of John and Mary Ashley Fellows. Her father, General John Fellows, served as an aide-de-camp to George Washington. I am one of 5 children. Mary and I have lived in several places. When we arrived in New York City, sometime around 1789, I became owner of a very lucrative commission business and began making speculative land purchases of tracts in present-day Wayne County and Parrington, New York. I bought my first parcel in the present-day town known as Penfield in 1795. It took a lot of convincing of my wife to agree to move to this wilderness. She was timid in regard to the move. She had heard about the dreaded fever in that county. She had seen her own little family safely through smallpox, and she dreaded making the change that might endanger our lives again. Mary and their teenage children were reluctant to make the move to the country and give up the comforts of their city home in New York. The promise of a house with living quarters equal to the space and graciousness of those that we were leaving persuaded the family to come to this area. I contracted with carpenters from Albany, New York, to build a homestead in 1811. Our house still stands at 1784 Penfield Road. One time it was the Yellow Rose Cafe, now is a beauty salon. I built or controlled several mills on Irondequoit Creek, including a sawmill, a grist mill, a distillery. You need to have a distillery when you're first starting out. An oil mill, a soap mill, clothing mill, and a tannery. My last commercial undertaking was a 5-story flour mill built in 1835, which failed in part due to the panic of 1837. I died on August 24th, 1840. I was buried next to my wife, Mary, who died August 18th, 1828, in Oakwood Cemetery here in Penfield. My death saddened the entire community. There is a bronze plaque on my grave that states, "The town was settled under D. Penfield as proprietor and takes its name from the circumstance and the respect and goodwill of the early settlers, who embraced the mode of testifying around regarding their family, who watched over the improvements of the town and parental solitude, and whose stories and fireside were ever accessible to the calls of charity, and whose sympathies were always attuned to the moans of grief." Thank you, from Daniel Penfield.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Mary Penfield, wife of Daniel Penfield. She brought grace and culture to this small town in the wilderness.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mary Fellows Penfield, wife of Daniel Penfield. Mr. Penfield and I married in 1784 and raised a family of 5 children: Henry, Harriet, Charlotte, Mary Jane, and George. We have been blessed to be both financially and socially well off. You can imagine my reluctance to move westward with Mr. Penfield to this newly founded town in the wilderness of western New York. In New York City, we lived in a 3-story red brick house with all the latest conveniences. We were close to family and friends and took part in the social activities in the that the big city offered. Our teenage children were also reluctant to leave their home and friends. And there was also that dreaded Genesee fever to endanger our very lives. Well, Mr. Penfield convinced us to move west, promising a gracious home as lovely as the one we were leaving behind. And oh, it was. Our new home was spacious and comfortable. We had a large oval-shaped drawing room that ran from the front of the house, with a custom-made woven carpet to fit the rounded corners. Behind this room was a large living room, and behind a large dining room. Sliding doors connected the rooms, which could be opened to create a very large room for entertaining, and we did. Outside to the east, we enjoyed a beautiful English garden. It was in that garden that my dear husband would hand feed his pet deer. He enjoyed the garden as he walked to his store that was directly east of the garden. My health was not good in later years, and I was confined to a wheelchair. Our loyal manservant, Zach, pushed me around in my chair. When the Presbyterian Church was built, Mr. Penfield saw to it that the front door and our pew were made wide enough to accommodate my chair. My dear husband was right about our new home, Penfield. It was a good location, planned by a wise man that grew into the beautiful town of today.
Our next speaker is going to be John Stroger. John Stroger actually came to town before the Penfields. He came here to work for Mr. Penfield, but he was here several years before they arrived.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Stroger. I was born in West Hall, England, and immigrated to the United States as a young man. In 1796, I married Margaret Scott in Kinderhook, New York. Mr. Daniel Penfield had holdings in that town, and we became acquainted. I came to Northfield in November of 1800 with Margaret and our 2 young sons. I was hired to operate the sawmill for Mr. Penfield. It was built by Eli Lyon, a carpenter from Canandaigua. By 1803, he had built a grist mill, which I ran as well. Mr. Penfield accepted winter wheat from the early settlers to settle their mortgage payments. Those early days were wild and wonderful. The town was a wilderness with a few scattered homes, mostly cabins. The settlers went first to Canandaigua to see Zachariah Seymour, land agent for Mr. Penfield. He would complete the sale and direct them to their lands following an old Indian trail. After arriving, they met with the dangers of the wilderness. Wolves and bears were some of the early town residents. Rattlesnakes lived in the wet areas. These creatures were a threat to the safety of the settlers, their children, and livestock. The town paid a bounty for wolf skins. I was there when the Penfield family arrived in 1811. They lived in a mansion. My days on earth were cut short when I died on September 8th, 1812, at the age of 45. I have the distinction of having the oldest marked grave in Oakwood Cemetery.
Our next character is going to be Samuel Rich. He also came to town in those very early days.
My name is Samuel Rich. I was born in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, one of 7 children. My 2 oldest sisters were married and living in Northfield when I decided to pay them a visit in 1799. I had no transportation other than my feet, so I walked from Massachusetts to Northfield. It was quite a walk. It wasn't an easy trip at that time. I hunted for my food and along the way mostly slept under the stars. When I arrived, they were mighty glad to see me. While in the area, I did some scouting around and found land that I wanted to buy. I walked back home and convinced my father to help me with my purchase. Eventually, I owned 1,000 acres in the area. I returned in 1809 and shortly after married Mary Case, daughter of the Baptist minister in town. In 1816, we built our lovely home that overlooked my holdings. We planted vineyards and apple orchards. I built a sawmill just over the town line to the south. In partnership with Mr. Andrew Lincoln, we built a gristmill in 1821, also just over the town line. We raised a family together, and in 1842, my dear wife left this earth. Her death left me so grief-stricken that I wanted to leave the house we had shared. I sold the home to Mr. Rowe, who later sold it to my daughter. Mary and her husband, Isaac Raymond. It remained in the family well into the 20th century and is still loved and cared for and stands at 2204 5 Mile Line. It is a local and national landmark. I remarried and moved downstream to build a sawmill, gristmill, and a new home. This gristmill in later years became known as the Daisy Flour Mill. It is also still standing and is also a local and national landmark. I must have built them well. Later I sold this mill and moved to Rochester, where I died in July of 1875 at the age of 89. I was laid to rest with my beloved Mary in Oakwood Cemetery.
Mr. Rich mentioned that he built his mills just over the line into Parrington, and some of you probably already know the story. It was because Daniel Penfield had the water rights tied up. He decided who was going to be able to use the water power in town and who wasn't going to use it. So they figured if they built over the line, they didn't have to deal with Daniel Penfield, so it was all good. Our next guest is going to be Mr. Henry Fellows. Henry Fellows came to town a few years after the Penfields got here, and he was a mover and shaker at that time.
Good afternoon. I am Henry Fellows, brother of Mary Fellows Penfield. As a young man, I was fortunate to be able to graduate from Williams College and study the law in the office of Peter Van Schaik in Kinderhook, New York. I came west to Canandaigua with my nephew, Henry Penfield, in 1806 to set up a law practice. My nephew was only 3 years my junior, so we got along quite well. In 1813, I moved my young family to Penfield. The family included my wife, Sophia, sons Henry Jr. and John, and daughter Mary. I wanted to be nearer my 3 sisters that lived there. We rented a home for several years, then built the house that still stands at 1880 Penfield Road. Through the years, we added 7 more children to our family. Sophia and I were quite fortunate that all 10 of our children lived to adulthood. That was a very rare blessing in the early 19th century. In Penfield, I continued to practice law, but that was secondary to operating my 200-acre farm. It may be hard to believe today, but that 200 acres surrounded my home near the 4 corners of town. In 1835, I built a distillery at the farm, and it was the last of the early distilleries built in this place. Our home was a center of activity in the town, with 10 active children under the roof. I could play a decent fiddle, so we hosted many lively square dances. Sometimes I fiddled for only my own family. We were large enough to make our own square dance. I also believed in doing my civic duty as the opportunity presented itself for the good of the community and as an example for my children. Everyone should pitch in and do their part. I served as Penfield Town Supervisor from 1822 to 1828 as an early town justice of the peace and also in the state assembly. My dear wife, Sophia, died in 1852, and I followed her in 1858. Our remains lie in Oakwood Cemetery, along with thousands of other past Penfield residents. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Mr. Timothy Bush. Timothy Bush was a blacksmith in Penfield in the early days.
I am Timothy Bush. I lived in Penfield and worked as a blacksmith. My biggest claim to fame came many years after I left this earth through 2 of my descendants. My son Obadiah was a merchant in Rochester. His son James served as an Episcopalian minister. James' son Samuel Prescott was a prominent steel manufacturing. His son Prescott Sheldon served as a U.S. Senator from Connecticut from 1952 to 1963. Prescott's son, George Herbert Walker Bush, served as our 41st President of the United States. And his son, George Walker, served as our 43rd President. And I hear tell there might be another Bush out there that has an interest in that position. My dear wife Lydia and daughter Livonia preceded me in death. Their remains lie in lot 455 of Oakwood Cemetery, right next door here. I provided them with grave markers to commemorate their lives. As you will see, I provided in my will for my own headstone, but it was never purchased. My remains lie with my wife and daughter, with nothing to mark my life. I would like to read just a couple of excerpts from my last will and testament. I, Timothy Bush, considering the uncertainty of this mortal life and being of sound mind, blessed the Almighty God for that, do make and publish this my last will and testament in a manner of form and following. First, I will and direct that out of my estate all of my debts and funeral expenses be paid. Next, I give and bequeath to my sons Harvey, Timothy, Obadiah N., Henry, and Barney Bush the sum of 50 cents each to be paid to them within 1 year of my decease. I give to my daughter Anna Chamberlain the sum of $1 to be paid in a manner and a time aforesaid. I give and bequeath to my daughter Lydia Bush, otherwise known as Lydia Eubank, and to her heirs and assigns forever all of my real estate, both real and personal, whatever the same may be found or located. In particular, all monies I may have advanced for her towards the house and lot she now occupies on King Street in said city, and the same which my said son on Alexander Street in said city. And all monies now due me from said Henry Bush and Erasmus D. Smith as assignee from James S. Bush, and all other property and every description and nature aforesaid. I direct to erect within reasonable time after my decease a head and footstone at my grave with a proper inscription thereon, stating my age, name, and the time of decease, which together shall not cost to exceed the sum of $25. I also direct that my body be buried in the town of Penfield in said county by the grave of my first wife. It's obvious that my daughter did not follow through with my wishes in my last will and testament. As you can see that my head and footstone is not there today. I don't know if my dear grandparents have a marker or not. I guess I'll have to look into that as time goes on. Thank you for having me here today.
Our next speaker, Mercy Cook, was an early resident of Penfield and later a resident of Webster because of the split of the town. So I don't know where Mercy, oh, there she is. Mercy's short, so she's difficult to see. So this is Mercy Cook, and she also she brought a replica of the house that she lived in when the house was in Penfield and later in Webster, and it's an exact replica of her home.
Good afternoon. I'm Mercy Cook, and I live in this fine stone house over here. It was my family built the house from stone that they picked up in the field, and it's on Shoecraft Road. Shoecraft Road was at first until 1816 known as Frymeyer Road. And then a Mr. John Shoecraft became a bit famous, and so they changed the name of the road to Shoecraft. So this is our stone house. It's solid and strong, and it's made with clear plank floors. One of the floors is made from basswood, and the basswood grove is down where Xerox is today, and ash as well. So good, strong house, good, strong floors. And there aren't any fireplaces in our home because we could afford to have stoves at this time. We're very fortunate also to be able to afford limestone sills, lintels, and limestone corner pieces called coins. The coins are made, as I said, from limestone, and they let people know that we have a bit more money than if we had to have brick. So this is the 1830s, and the men who fought in the War of 1812 along Lake Ontario shore went home to Rhode Island with stories of abundance of good land for sale at a very good price. Mr. Daniel Penfield has been selling large amounts of land, And so after a lot of thought, my husband Asa and I sent him a letter asking to purchase property. We had heard that the land north of the ridge is kind of swampy. So we bought 70 acres south of Ridge Road here on Shoecraft. We're finding the soil very good for farming, and before we came here, as I said, the road had been known as Freimeyer Road and then became Shoecraft. By the time we came here, there were already several water wheel-powered sawmills on 4 Mile Creek up by Lake Road. There were many orchards, and in 1806, Mr. Abram Foster bought 569 acres on Lake Road. He bought them for $1,900. There were already quite a few roads when we got here, too. Some are a little bumpy. Salt Road is named for the salt springs found there. Plank Road is from the planks that were put down to keep the road dry. A little bumpy, but dry. 5 Mile Line Road is 5 miles from the Penfield Four Corners. And Basket Road is named for the willow trees used for the local basket making industry. The Ridge Road was a Native American trail that was used along the shore of Lake Ontario. Soldiers during the War of 1812 used this trail from Niagara to Oswego. Lake Road follows the shore of Lake Ontario, and that by this time, there were a lot of businesses along there. 1816. It's a really good thing we didn't live here yet because there was frost every month except July. 1818. Mr. Ebenezer Cook's Inn at 650 Ridge Road is one of the regular stagecoach stops between Rochesterville and Oswego. I'm going to step aside, I'm not Mercy right at this moment, to say that that building is on Ridge Road across from the bowling alley. Okay. It is still there, it's in neglect, needs preservation. Okay, I'm Mercy again. Lots of people are joining the Methodist Church these days. 1825, can you imagine a new canal was being dug right across our whole New York state? What a lot of work that must have been. The canal goes through nearby Rochesterville, Pittsford, and Parrington. Our North Penfield wheat and other products can now be taken there to be shipped. Before that, we farmers were taking our products up to 9 Mile Point up on Lake Ontario for shipping. Ships are in and out of that harbor every day in good weather. You wondering why it's called 9 Mile Point? Well, it's 9 miles along the lakeshore from there to Shalai, the river. 1826. They had started a silkworm business on Holt Road, not doing well. Probably not going to have a silk business here in North Penfield. 1830, we have a small village at the intersection of Ridge Road and 9 Mile Point Road. And to the east of us is growing every year with new businesses. This year we have a new store in the village and it's made from brick. 1835, our family took a Sunday ride north at the end of Holt Road to see Mr. John Whiting's lovely new home overlooking Lake Ontario. He has a sawmill and a tannery on the creek nearby. I'm going to step away again. Do you know Mr. John Whiting's house?
Yes, the White House.
It's the White House, yes. Yes. 1835. 1837, Whig farmers here in North Penfield traveled to Rochester to hear Daniel Webster, the great orator, speak. They were very impressed that day as he stood on the courthouse steps and said, "This country is young, great, strong, and full of activity. My faith is in the people." Well, we got together with neighbors and friends, and there's been a lot of talk of we here in North Penfield separating and becoming our own town. February 6th, 1840. This is an exciting day here in North Penfield. We're a new town, 2,235 people, and our leaders have decided that we are to be named Webster, after Daniel Webster. According to Mr. Frank, the census taker, our new town, as I just said, has 2,235 residents, 4 sawmills, an ashery, a tannery, 3 stores, 5 grist mills, 1,031 cows, 93,000 pounds of butter. Also, $200 has been set aside for the poor.
We got an interesting perspective of a part of Penfield that we don't know as much about, and we don't always hear about the part that became Webster, but it was truly part of Penfield until it broke off in 1840. Our next guest is Mr. Calvin Wooster Owen. Calvin Owen was definitely a character. We have his memoirs, which we published in a book. So we have a lot of information about him, which we'll relay some of that information along to you now.
So what a great pleasure it is to be with all of my fellow townspeople here today. As you have just heard, my name is Calvin Wooster Owen. I came to Penfield in the year 1815. I worked at the carpenter and joiner trade with my uncle. We helped build the small town of the early 1800s into the town it has become. I think it would have grown more had things been different. Daniel Penfield, who, as you have been told several times now, from whom the town derives its name, was the purchaser of the township and had only been for a few years when we came in. He was selling off farms as fast as he could. He was the owner of the mills and all the water privileges. And the water power was not fully developed because of that. Penfield did not use nor let others use the water as it should have been. And just to remind you of another fact about Mr. Penfield's great influence in the proprietorship of property here, he was the guy who said, "We're not going to allow people to buy village lots." He wouldn't sell to settlers. Therefore, that improvement of the village was not made as it should have been. If Mr. Penfield had not been a sort of dog in a manger. I have been interested in the many medical and social issues of my time. Medical doctors of the 1800s were, as you may not know, quacks, poisoning their patients with remedies such as arsenic, mercury in all of its applications, antimony, sulfates, and corrosion sublimates, and virtually all the drugs of that time. These doctors made liberal use of the lancet, butchering their patients. It does seem to me that there would not be so much pain and suffering by the human family if there were no doctors in this world. The movement for temperance was spread across the country, with neighbors devoted to the cause, total abstinence and intoxicating drinks. An order of the Sons of Temperance was organized in our village back in 1847, and I was one of the organizers of that order. We were met with opposition from the rum sellers and their patrons, some of whom are still around. This was a cause of great agitation in our village, and may I tell you, it still is. I was engaged to oversee the construction of the Methodist Church back in 1842. And in 1853, I designed the Penfield Seminary building. That one is still here. So there are numerous buildings in our town and neighboring towns that I worked on, and almost all of these are still standing today, which is more than I can say for those folks who live in them. I did much work on my residence back in 2029 5 Mile Line Road days. One of my favorite additions was the building of a library. It was the first library in the town of Penfield for the folks living here. So our village has come a long way. And I could talk all day long about the changes that have occurred, but I've got to leave here right now because I want to get a ticket fixed for parking my horse and buggy in a no parking zone at the back of the library. And I got to find somebody who's going to fix it for me. You all know about that kind of thing, too. Nothing's changed.
Oh, dear. Our next speaker is going to be Mr. Aristides Church. Good day, I'm Aristides Church. Friends call me Tide. I was born and raised in Penfield and lived my entire life here. In 1919, I was appointed as Penfield's first town historian, a title I was proud to carry. I loved to write, and I had written what I could find and what I knew about the Civil War soldiers. In 1896, I recorded that. After the First World War, I recorded the information about those soldiers as well. I left this information for future town historians and for scholars to study. I wrote reminiscences of my youth about the mid and late 19th and early 20th centuries. Let me recall some of them for you. Penfield in the early days was a busy place with its mills and factories. The Irondequoit Creek was fine water power, and its banks were lined with all sorts of industry. Penfield, as part of the Genesee country, was noted for its excellent quality of wheat, and flour mills did a thriving business. The Lincoln Pond, otherwise known as Spring Lake, while not in Penfield, was so near we always called it ours. It was said to cover about 60 acres and furnished in summer the finest bathing and swimming pools, boating and fishing grounds, and in the winter was noted for miles around as a skating park. Our favorite swimming pool was just above the dam, and the sawmill on the bank was a convenient dressing room. In our town, the Livingston Mill, the flouring mill that was said to cost $40,000 when it was built in 1836, was considered the finest flouring mill in western New York outside of Rochester. I remember seeing those long strings of farmers' teams loaded with wheat, waiting for their turn to unload. This property eventually passed into other hands and then went into disuse. The windows and doors were boarded up, and it became the habitat of bats, rats, and other creatures. It was also the rendezvous of card players and riotous people, and finally, spooks. They frightened every human out and created quite a furor in the community. There were stories of someone having been killed there accidentally and terrible other spook yarns. It was discovered that two men who knew the old mill from top to bottom went in through the tail race, and by showing lights, flashing and disappearing in the windows, gave the whole neighborhood the creeps. Then a crowd would rush over and clear the boards from a door, go in and search the whole building high and low and find nothing. A light snow on the ice one night showed their tracks very plain and gave their scheme away. But the reputation of the building was such that boys like me who were obliged to pass by there after dark did so with fear and trembling. The property was finally bought by a company that made a paper mill. The first owners of the paper mill, the Hagabon Company, made print paper. They burned out in 1868 or 69, started over again making cardboard, but that did not succeed. They sold to someone named Winger in about 1872. He laid out a lot of money on the property, but made a failure by attending more strictly to booze than to his business. It was rented and run for a time by Edward Williams, who, not understanding the business, also failed. Finally, the Lawless family bought and ran the business well for many years. Another industry on the creek was a woolen factory that was owned by Levi Duncan. I used to go there sometimes with the Duncan boys. One night it burned down, and being full of grease, it made a spectacular fire. My parents were Adventists. They were called Millerites at the time, and I had heard much talk about the final destruction of the world by fire. Yes, the world was going to burn up sometime. Sure, I was too young to go there to see that fire at the mill, but as I looked out of the window and saw that awful blaze reaching apparently to the sky, I thought the great day was surely come. Scared? Well, as I look back to that night, I believe I was. I remember hearing that the night watchman was asleep and took a narrow chance of being burned up. There were other places that were dear to the hearts of us youngsters to fish and swim in, notably the clay bank. There was a bend in the creek where we used to catch lots of fish, and it was fine for swimming too. And the most glorious sport was to climb partway up the clay bank and slide down into the soft, warm sand. About a quarter of a mile downstream was the deep hole, noted for good fishing in any season. Well, those days are gone. The only pleasure we can get of those happy days is to shut our eyes and dream about them. Thank you. And our next speaker is going to be Mr. Almond Stroger.
Hello, my name is Almond Stroger. I'm an inventor, businessman, and father. I was born to Samuel Stroger and Jane Clark Stroger on February 11th of 1839 in Penfield, New York. One of 14 children, several of whom died at young ages. My father was Daniel Penfield's miller. He was the grandson of Daniel Penfield's first miller. While young, I served in Company A of the 8th New York Cavalry. I received a commission as second lieutenant. Then I was a school teacher and eventually a principal in Penfield. I married Rosalda Clark, and we had 2 daughters, Harriet and Mary. We lived at one time in Topeka, Kansas, where I bought an undertaking business, and this is where my story begins, 20 years after leaving the Army. One morning while reading the newspaper, I read that a friend had died, and to my astonishment and amazement, I read that the burial was to be handled by a competitor, Now, I was known to be hot-tempered, and on this occasion I certainly was. I immediately grabbed the telephone, and after being connected to an operator, angrily accused her of misdirecting a call. In spite of her claims to the contrary, I remained convinced that this had been the case. I found out that the operator's husband was also an undertaker, and I was right. She was sending all phone calls to her husband. The thought came to me that I could solve the problem by eliminating the need for operators. I would design an automatic telephone switching system. I opened my desk drawer and took out a round cardboard box holding a dozen paper collars. I discarded the collars, and the short cardboard cylinder became the first telephone switch, the first Stroger switch. After many disappointments, I finally filed my landmark patent application on March 12th of 1889, and it was issued on March 10th of 1891, 2 years, as patent number 447918. The description of the patent was very precise, explaining the workings of the Stroger switch. In the late 1890s, my health was failing, and I moved to St. Petersburg, Florida. I continued to be involved with the operation of the city. One article in the local paper described me as inventive, ingenious, and short-tempered. I died in 1902, was buried in Greenwood Cemetery. 50 years later, a plaque was installed by my colleagues in the telephone industry, describing me as inventor and pioneer. And I'd like to add that I had the occasion to go through the City Museum in the city of Brockville, Ontario, Canada, and there they had an exhibition of dedicated to my invention, because it seems that that city hosted the one production facility for making Stroger automatic switching systems for distribution throughout all of Canada. And apparently it was the last factory in North America that made such things.
Our next Penfield character is a mere slip of a girl. It's little Nellie, who lived during the era of the Civil War in town. And she was known not only throughout our town, but she was known across the country as well because of what she had undertaken in our town. So I'd like to introduce you to little Nellie.
Good afternoon, friends. I am Ellen Teresa Williams, otherwise known as Little Nellie. I was born in Penfield on November 21st, 1849. I lost my dear, kind mother to the family scourge, consumption. Now we know it as tuberculosis. Just days before my 7th birthday, her dying wish was that I would take the Bible for my guide and take up my cross and follow Jesus. And in this way, I would one day meet my dear mother, where troubles and trials are never known. My father, Leander Kirk Williams, in some of the books he's listed as Leroy, but I believe his real name was Leander, was a successful proprietor of a drugstore and tailor shop. He was also successful at playing cards, and once he won a printing press from Mr. Smith. My brother, Leroy, used the press to print a small circular that contained ads, a few stories, and jokes. He left us to join the 8th New York Cavalry in August of 1862. He was shot and killed on November 12th, 1864, in the Shenandoah Valley. Father's health began to fail before I was 10, and it became necessary for me to assist him in the drugstore. This is where I began to work with the printing press. When I was 11, I began to print a monthly paper for the people of our village. But the circulation increased to the degree that I began to print it weekly and circulate it in the county. I called my paper the Penfield Extra, and in the masthead there is a Bible, and under it it says, Our Hope. Editors of other papers found out about my little paper and inserted information about it in their papers as a news article. I began to get subscriptions from all over the U.S. until over 2,000 copies a week were printed. My paper contained articles submitted by young readers, exchanges from other papers, ads, articles, and poems, and local news about the weather and events in town, comments on politics, puns, and jokes, and several times columns on the early history of the town. There were some updates on the state of the terrible war that was raging, but not so many as to depress the reader. You will see on the display table over there some views of my newspaper. In 1863, we decided to visit the kind editors of other newspapers from Buffalo to Syracuse. When we returned, we told about our visit, and I quote, "We saw many pleasant villages on our journey, but we saw none that looked like home. In fact, Penfield is a beautiful town and a splendid country surrounding it, but our present inhabitants are letting it run down. The city of Rochester is getting all our trade, and the failure of the wheat crop in this section is spoiling the mill property. We have 3 grist mills, the largest of which is entirely abandoned. Our manufacturing interest is failing. We had 4 large woolen factories burned in the last few years, which were never rebuilt. And in this way, our lovely village is going to ruin." End quote. I am quite happy to see that the trend has turned around. I published my paper through April 2nd, 1866, when the cost of newsprint became too high. I married my dear husband, Henry Braden, on my 19th birthday, November 21st, 1868. We lived in Rochester and had 2 beautiful children together, a son and a daughter. Alas, like my dear mother, I fell victim to the family scourge, consumption, and died May 20th, 1875. My remains lie in Mount Rest Cemetery in the town of Bergen, next to my Henry, who died in 1907. This was only recently found out, I believe, by the town, our town. Thank you.
Okay, and now we're going to be jumping ahead a few years. Our next speaker is Mrs. Irene Gossen, who was the supervisor of Penfield in the 1970s.
Hello, friends. I'm Irene Gossen. When I was elected as the Penfield Town Supervisor in 1971, I had the honor of being the first female supervisor in Monroe County and only the second Democrat that served as supervisor in Penfield. I was concerned for the environment, and so this was my focus during my time in office. We appointed a conservation board. Penfield was the first town in the county to have one. We built on the works of the Conservation Advisory Council that had been appointed under Supervisor Howard Frank. Their charge had been to map the wetlands, waterways, and open spaces of the town. The new board had subcommittees on recycling, solid waste disposal, open space use and inventory, transportation, and planning board coordination. We passed an environmental protection ordinance in June of 1973 and a commercial excavation ordinance. Under my leadership, we supported the Irondequoit Creek and Bay preservation. In August of 1972, we urged bayfront towns to declare a moratorium on major development until a master plan for the bay was developed. We adopted the Irondequoit Bay Master Plan in January of 1975. We were concerned with the preservation of the wetland area in Penfield known as the 1,000-acre swamp. It is one of Monroe County's largest wetland systems. A steering committee, which would become the 1,000-acre Swamp Preservation Committee, was formed, and in July of 1976, they recommended that the group partner with the Nature Conservancy. Today, the 1,000-acre swamp is a valuable educational, recreational, and environmental asset to our town. In 1973, we designated the clematis, or clematis, as the official town flower. That year, we also adopted an historic sites ordinance. By 1976, 8 properties were designated, and the Daisy Flower Mill District of 6 acres with the mill and 3 houses was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 1975, Penfield became the first town in Monroe County to protect its salt pile by enclosing it with a salt shed. Penfield's first dedicated park was opened on July 14, 1973, as Penfield Irondequoit Creek Linear Park. The park has recently been renamed as Channing Philbrick Park. Harris Wayland Park, in use since July 1971, was dedicated in September of 1973. Area citizens, myself included, protested the opening of the Northeast Quadrant Solid Waste Facility, also called the Gloria Drive Landfill, in East Penfield. The county opened it anyway on June 28, 1975. It was in operation for 5 years and closed in June of 1980. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Well, I wanted to say, in researching Irene Gossen, I was very shocked to find out that the Gloria Drive landfill opened on the day that Bob and I got married. So we had nothing to do with it. That's the last of our historic characters that we're going to hear from. We are going to hear from one more character in a couple of minutes, a present-day living and breathing person. But I wanted to invite you first, when we're all finished, to come up and take a look. Both the tables have artifacts. There are copies from Lil Nellie's paper. There are some of the papers of Almond Stroger. There's photographs of as many of the people as I could find. Some of them were living in the days before photography was available. So come on up and take a look at them after our last character. And also, if you didn't have a chance to enjoy some refreshments, do that. So now I'd like to introduce you to our final character, and that is Mr. Tony LaFountain, present supervisor of our town.
What a great afternoon, and thank you for everyone that has attended. These programs that are put together by the Heritage Association are just absolutely fantastic for us to be able to not only capture, but most importantly share all of the great rich history that we have here in Penfield. So I am Tony LaFountain. I am the current town supervisor. I was born and raised in a small town in the Adirondacks, Saranac Lake. And when I was in college, I met the former Mary Penfield, at the time known as Lynanne Donovan. And I followed her back to this area very enthusiastically, I must say. And my involvement with the town began very early. We came back to this area in May of 1975, and in June of 75, I became an employee of the town of Penfield in the Public Works Department, and that was what I had studied, construction and civil engineering in college. And so I had found my career in this great community of Penfield, working for, at the time during that 5.5-year period, 2 supervisors. And I will say that I've been very fortunate over the years to work very closely with 6 supervisors. And each one of those supervisors I have learned something from. And I would like to say that I took a piece of each one of them to help develop my personal career working with the town. The first supervisor that I worked with was Irene Gossen. That was the person in the administration that hired me in the Public Works Department. And I continued working with Anna Bunchu, who was the supervisor that followed Irene. After about 5.5 years, I had an opportunity to leave to work at Eastman Kodak Company. But one of the things that I knew I wanted to do was to continue to stay very active in Penfield. So as I left to pursue my career at Kodak, I stayed on and became chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals for the town. And I did that for 5 years. And that was a very rewarding committee involved with different aspects of the town government and a little bit more of the history of the town. In 1985, I had an opportunity to run for town board, and so I took up that opportunity. A little bit of it was in the encouragement of my wife and family, who said, you know, you're always saying that you could do this better, different, have some different ideas. Well, you know what? If you think that's the case, go out and see if you're right with that. So I was elected to the town board. I was elected 5 different terms to the town board and served this great community for 18 years. I then left and then during that time, I worked very closely with Don Mack, supervisor, John Nolan, supervisor, and then Shan Philbrick. I had an opportunity to come back to this great community and run as supervisor, and that was an honor that I accepted. And I actually came back in 2009. I ran for supervisor, took office in 2010, and over the last 5 years have been honored to be your supervisor and to support many good things that, again, that has been built on that foundation from the early years of Daniel Penfield that has been built on over the last several hundred years. When I did take office, I had the honor of taking office during our bicentennial, 2010, and there was a lot of work that built up to that the preceding 2 years by a committee of residents, and we had a year-long celebration of our 200-year anniversary, and it was just great to see so many of our residents come out and get involved with all of that activity. For the last 5 years, I've been working very closely with our town board, our town staff, town residents, our businesses, to look for ways to continue to better Penfield. We've been involved with improving our infrastructure, drainage, roads, and sewers, continuing that long, rich history that we have of preserving the environment and all the sensitive features that we have known as our EPODs. Balancing residential and commercial development, also taking into account our rich agricultural heritage that we have, so that we have that balance. And certainly managing our cost, because today it really is all about managing our cost. We've expanded our open space. We've added to our parks. We've cleaned up the environment. We've improved traffic safety. We've updated plans and studies that will help take us to that through that next generations to come. We're working very closely on energy and the environment. The town has been very active with working on solar and expanding some solar projects across the town. And then our partnerships with schools and other communities, because today you just can't do it all by yourself. It really is all about partnership. As I look back over the last almost 40 years, I've been honored to be a very small part of Penfield history. I started my career off back in 1975 as an employee of this town. And I'll end my career, my working career here, as a supervisor. We've raised our 2 daughters here. We're currently raising our 2 granddaughters here. And Penfield truly is our home, as it is to many of you. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about myself and another chapter of this great community's rich history. Thank you.
I wanted to say just one last thing. If you have any questions about any of the characters that were here today, please don't ask the actors, because they probably won't be able to help you. I could maybe help you, maybe I'll know, maybe not. But if you really have something that's burning that you need to know, come into the local history room and see me, and we can look it up together. Thank you.